All right, so let's talk about Napster. So Napster is a service that hosts a lot of music content, right? And it allows you to they have a phone application, right, that you can play all sorts of music, different genres. You can search, right? You can leave comments. You can share with people. It's a social network that is around music, right? And it allows you to they expose their data, right? They you can register with an account for them, right? And create a developer account that they give you an API key, and then you can use that uh, to search their library, right? You can search for albums, for tracks, for playlists, right? For artists, right? They have a lot of content of imagery and videos, right? And MP3 that you can play music and so we're going to be using it just to illustrate, how is that you would integrate with a service like that, right? Now, what we're going to be learning here is also applicable to any other service that you might be considering or you might already be working with, right? And it's going to illustrate how you would implement some of the screens that are required in one of the project options, right? We're going to implement the search screen and the detail screen, right, from the requirements, and then illustrate how users can then share that information, right, by liking or leaving a comment or a review, right, and then folks being able to find those reviews and then visiting each other's profiles and seeing, what other content have they created, right? So again, this is going to illustrate, several of those requirements, so you can, have an idea on that we're on the same page, understanding what the requirements are, right? So first, let's implement a placeholder, right? A landing page where somebody might arrive that they want to use Napster. Now I'm going to import it. I'm going to include it as part of the Canvas application, but it could have been any other project, right? But I'm going to integrate it to the Canvas application. You would integrate it maybe to some other application, right? So whatever the parent project is, right? You would do something similar to integrate it. So first, I'm going to create it separately, right, as in its own directory, so that it could be really integrated into any other parent project. Okay. So I'm going to create a landing screen in the front end, right, where we're going to create a directory for the Canvas as a subset of the Canvas project, right? So let's do an npm start. So we still have an account, we're still logged in, perfect. So I'm going to create a directory separate for Napster. So this will be Napster, and we'll have the landing page in index.tsx. Okay. And for now, it'll just be Napster, right? And what we'll do is that this will show up in a new landing page, inside of Canvas. We'll put a new option here to be able to navigate there, right? So in their Canvas, in the navigation, we'll add a new option, right? So not just account, calendar, but we'll add maybe Napster as a new option. Oops. Like that, right? So that if we click on Napster, we want to display this new Napster screen, right? And for that, we'll need to add a route, right? So let's add a route for Napster, and then it'll show our brand new Napster screen like that. There it is. Okay. So and within Napster, we would like to be able to have several screens. We want one for searching, right? Like a full text search, which will come back and display the results that match that search term. Then we would want maybe another screen, like if you click on one of the albums or artists, right, or tracks or playlists, right, it would go and navigate to a different screen where you can see the details of that album or that music, song, right, or track or artist or playlist, right? It'll be a separate detail screen where you can navigate. So it'll have its own navigation routes, right, in a separate screen. So we'll put here a /star, right, that's going to allow us to handle sub navigation under Napster. Okay. And then in Napster, let's take a look at the API of what it allows you to do, right? So here's the documentation that you're welcome to take a look at and explore. But I'm just going to go over it here, right? So Napster provides all sorts of operations. You can do a full text search, right? You can search for artists. You can interact with individual artists, right? You can interact with individual albums, or you can retrieve album covers, right? You can, once you have the ID of an album, you can then ask for additional information such as tracks, right, and lyrics, right, and MP3 audio, so you can play small snippets of a song, right? You can ask for different genres, right, playlists. So let's take a look at some of these. So for instance, in the search API, right, it allows you to provide a textual query, right, as part of the query parameter. You can say query equal and then some text that you want to search by, right? And then you can either ask for that you want artists, or you want albums, or you want playlists, or what is it that you want? What are you looking for, right? Or you can say nothing at all, right? So for instance, let's take a look at this. This one is a query where we are encoding the query of Eagles, right? And we're looking for artists. But we could say that we're looking for albums, right? We're looking for albums. So the all results have two properties, right? An object that has two properties. One of them is a meta property that keeps track of how many total items, right, were matched. So there appears, like more than 1,700 records appear for the search term of Eagles, right? And it's showing right now the first 80 elements, okay, the first 80 elements, items. And then the actual data from the search results is available here in the second property called search. And then this contains three sub properties. One of them is a query, what I actually searched for. The second one is the actual data, and the data contains several subsections, right, of either albums, artists, tracks, or playlists, right, that all match your search criteria of Eagles, right? And so, for instance, you could display this. Notice that there's 20 of each, right? There's 20 albums, 20 artists. That's why this adds up to 80, because there's 4 times 20. And so this allows you to kind of like paginate, where you can say, well, offset, start at the next 20 and give me the next 20, right? So that you can, move the window of results forward or backwards, right? So you can jump around forwards, you can jump backwards. The total count allows you to calculate how many pages there are, right? So it would be, 1,700 divided by 20, that's how many pages there are, right? And then you can calculate what the offsets are, so you can jump around forwards or backwards, right? Now we're going to be focusing on the albums here, and this is just an array of multiple albums. Each album has a primary key and has a name plus a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So we're going to just grab just a few properties that are of interest here, just for display purposes, right? And which in particular, we're going to focus on the ID and the name, right? But there's plenty of other stuff in there, the copyright, when it was released, all sorts of things, right? And so let's practice, right? Going to fetch this data and then rendering it in the front end. Okay. So what now? Notice that once you know the primary key of an album, you can do subsequent queries, like an additional query, where you can provide the ID, right, for that particular album, and then it just comes back with those details about that album, right? Or you can also, ask for some information that has already been pre-created for you. Like for instance, what are the top albums, or what are the top picks, right, by the staff in Napster, right? And so these are very useful, maybe for populating the landing page, like the home screen, right? Because that's one of the requirements in the project, that if you come to the landing page or the home screen, you always have something new to show, right? That it's dynamic. And so you could use these three queries, right, to kind of like keep the landing page, dynamic and changing over time, right? Let's say if you come tomorrow, it'll be different from today, right? And also, if you know the particular ID of the album, you can ask for images, right? So you can display album cover and things like that. Okay. So anyway, so let's use that. Let's render an array of albums. Let's go fetch some albums from the API, and then as an array, right, iterate over them and display them here on the screen, right? And so this is what the structure of the data looks like. So let's create a couple of files, right, so that we can start querying the server for these albums, also for being able to create fetch the album cover images, right? So the album cover images are all hosted at this particular Napster server that has that particular name. And then the URL needs to include the ID of the album that you want to retrieve the image for. So, and the URL looks like this, right? Look, it has the Napster image URL here. Albums, then the album ID. So we're going to pass you an album object, which has a primary key, and then you can use it to finish up the URL, which is then you can specify the exact size that you want the album, right? We're asking it as an image that is 300 by 300, right? So let's do that. Let's copy that into a client. So we'll create a client here, client.ts. We'll paste that. Let's put this here. Okay. And then let's create a component, right, that given an array of albums, right, it's going to iterate over those albums, right, and then display them in a row, right? So let's copy that, and let's create a component that can render an array of albums. So albums tsx, and it's 2 slides right here. So let's go over this. So this is accepting an array of albums, and then inside of a table, it's going to have a single row, and then it's going to iterate and have multiple columns, 1 column per album. So it's going to display like a long row of albums. So my idea was that we could render maybe the albums in 1 row, the playlists in another row, right? Then the artists in another row, right? And then the tracks in another row. Very much like Netflix, right? You go to Netflix, you get these rows, and each row is like a different category. So that's what I was going for, right? So yeah, so and for the album, the way we're going to represent it is we're going to display the name of the album, and then above that we're going to display the image of the album, right? And the image of the album is going to be a calculated image. We're going to pass the album object, and then the album image URL function is going to render, right? It's going to come back with the actual URL to the image. Okay. So yeah, so we have that. Let's now have let's create a screen that can search for albums, and as we type and retrieve these albums and we get the array of albums, we're going to be able to pass them to this component. The component will render the array of albums. Okay. So yeah, let's create a search screen that is going to search for for albums. Let's put them in the client. So let's go over that. Oops. Like that. Let's go over that. So we're going to use Axios, right, to go fetch these albums. So we're going to use Axios to retrieve using the Napster API, which is Napster.com version 2.2, and do search verbose. And then the query, this is the text that we're going to type in at an input field. And then we're going to pass the input field text, right? We're going to build this URL. We're also going to pass the key. This key is an API key that you have to apply for to Napster or whatever API vendor that you're using, right? And they will give you a key, right? And that which you can then have to pass through, every time you are requesting something from the service, okay? Now this key, I have the key stored in an environment variable called React App Napster API key, which is, I believe, here. I believe I have it here. Yeah, there it is. So React Napster API key, right? So that should be able to retrieve that key. It's a very long, right, hexadecimal value, and so I need to provide it every time I go out to Napster, right, to identify myself, right? And so let's create the search component. So it's search screen. So the search screen is just going to be a React component that is going to have a couple of state variables. One of them is going to hold the actual search term, right? As we type, right, we're going to save the search term here in this state variable. We're going to go out to the server, right, to fetch those search results. It's going to come back, right, and then we're going to store the search results in a local state variable, right? And then we're going to iterate over the albums that came back, right? So here's the input field. So here's the input field where that we're going to type in our search term, right? And then the button that is going to invoke the full set text search and send the term over to the server to come back and then give us the results that we want to display. Okay. Right. So let's display that here underneath, like that. And yeah, and that's it, right? And then in our Napster screen, we can just display the search. Napster search. There we go, like that, right? Which we can then search, right? And then here we can search for, hello or something, right? And then indeed we get some data back from the server, right? So this is all data that is coming back from the Napster server, okay? Everybody good? Everybody still with me? Right, so when I describe in the project requirements of a search screen, this is what I mean, right? That the search screen should allow you to type in some search terminology, right? That is going to be sent over to your remote API, and your remote API should respond with some data that you can then render as like a summary, right? Summary of all those that data set that came back that meets your search criteria, right? So that's the search screen with the results, with the search results, right? The additional requirement is that you should be able to click on one of these, right? And then navigate to a separate screen where you show more information about that particular item. Now, these items could be anything, right? I'm talking about songs and albums and whatnot, but yours could be certainly other things, such as it could be maybe a sports team that you're looking for, right? Or for a particular sport. It could be, events that are happening around Boston. It could be stocks, right? It could be something financial. It could be something that's books, right? Or movies, something about entertainment. It could be recipes, right? You can connect to Yumly, has all sorts of recipes that you can search for, and then it shows you different ingredients, right, and the steps how to make that, right. Lots of pictures of how it is that you can make that, bake some food or something, right? So whatever, right? And then when you click on one of these, right, it navigates to the details of that item. Okay, so let's implement that. So let's create a separate screen, right, that we can display the details of albums, right? And you can certainly add things such as add details for an artist, right, or a playlist, right, or a particular track, right, that you want to play. Right? So let's focus on just implementing the retrieving the details of a particular album, right? So back in our client, let's add being able to retrieve the details for an album, and we're going to display them in a separate screen that renders the album details, right? So let's put that in another component called album, meaning it's singular. It's just displaying one single album, right? And what we're going to do is that we're going to pass to this component as part of a parameter in the URL called album ID. We're going to pass the ID of the album, and then what this component is going to do that if we do pass this album ID, is going to go fetch the album from the server using this query, right? And the query basically is just encoding in the Napster, right, URL, the ID of the album and the key, right? And it's going to retrieve an array of albums that contains only one album, right? Because again, it's a primary key, it's a single album. So I'm here unwrapping that album, right, and returning that one single album in the array, right? And then we can render it, and so we're just going to render the name of the album and the image, but certainly there's plenty more information in there. Okay. And so now to navigate to this screen, we need a placeholder, right? A route, right? We need links, right? So let's do that. So we'll need a link. We're going to add a link to the albums, right? The array of albums, right? We're gonna convert them all into hyperlinks, right? So that when you click on it, it'll navigate to the details screen, right? So let's do that. Right, so back in the albums, right, this album name, right, is going to do that. So now these become hyperlinks, right? And I guess this should still be H3 or something like that. So I can click on it. If I click on it, it wants to notice what it does, right? That if I click on it, notice that there it is, right? So it says it adds albums and then the ID of the album, right? Now we don't have a route for that, and the route we'd want is to navigate to this new screen that we just created. So let's create a route for that. So let's go back to Napster landing page. So let's create a several routes for this, right? So let's see, do I have that? Yeah, okay. So we need the detail screen, the brand new detail screen. So let's import that, right? And routes. Right, so we'll have to import a few things here. There we go, right? There we go. So if we go back and search for, hello again, right? We can click on here and it navigates to the detail screen, which displays just the name of the song, right? And that particular album, right? 1, 2, 3. So we can click on this, right? And then it goes to the detail screen for that particular album. Everybody good? That makes sense? Okay. So there you go, right? So that is what I mean, right? In the requirements document of implementing the search screen, right? And the details screen, right? The search screen should go and retrieve multiple objects that match a particular search criteria, whereas the detail screen, we can pass the ID of one of the albums, and it would make a subsequent query to go fetch the details for that particular item. Okay. Um, all right, excellent. So we can also fetch tracks, right? So that if we are in a particular album, not only are we displaying the meta information for that album, but we could go fetch other things, right? More images, maybe, right? Or more album cover, or video snippets or tracks, right? That we can maybe select and play these tracks. So let's add a query to fetch tracks for that particular album, right? So in the client, we're going to use the track API, right? That if we provide the album ID, right, we can go additionally go fetch the tracks for that particular album, right? And then we'll add a placeholder, right, in our album screen so that we can display not only the album data but the tracks in the album. We'll find tracks that can call the clients of retrieving the albums for that particular the tracks for that particular album, right? And then we're going to not only go fetch the album ID, but we're going to invoke and retrieve the tracks for that, right? So if we so if we go back to hello, search, and then we go to the album, it fetches that, and then sets the tracks, and we should display the album tracks down below, right? We're going to iterate over the tracks, right? Maybe down here, and there they are, right? Here are the tracks in that particular album. Make sense? We could even add the capability of displaying a audio tracks, right? So that you can play sample music, and I'm not sure why it's not displaying. Why are you not trying? Oh, it shows that it's muted. Why is this muted? Why are you muted? Not sure why it's muted. All right, excellent. Yeah, so again, I'm illustrating, right, use cases of implementing those requirements. Okay. All right, I'll leave the track details for you, right, if you want to work on that. All right, so we need to fix one problem, right? We do have an issue, right? Notice that here, as I'm looking at this particular album, if I refresh the screen, notice that it's recreating the screen just fine, right? But you might say, well, how does it know that it's the same album? Where am I storing that? Well, it's over here, right? It's in the URL. It's encoded in the URL. And that's the only information that I need to be able to recreate this screen, right? But if I go back, right, notice that it does not remember that I had searched for the keyword hello, right? It doesn't remember that. Notice that if I go forward, it does remember that the information was about that particular album, because again, you can always grab the ID from the URL, right? The album ID is encoded in the URL, and that's plenty of information to recreate this screen from scratch. But this one doesn't have that information. There's no information encoded in here, right? Ideally, I would be able to encode it as 1, 2, 3 or hello or whatever search term I had used, and it would be able to recreate the screen. But we don't have that, right? So let's fix that, right? And this is a very common issue, right, in implementing web applications in general, right? If you if you go shopping on Amazon, right, as you are navigating through their online store, right, you'll notice that the URLs at the top are fairly long, right? And so this is a technique they use to encode enough information in that URL, right, so that you can create the screen that you see rendered for you, right? So notice that if you copy that URL and then maybe text it to someone else, right? If they click on that link that you text, they're going to be able to see exactly what you were looking at, right? Even though that screen is not a hard-coded screen, right? It's not a physical screen, right? That screen is entirely dynamically generated, right? And so it needs to recalculate that screen all entirely from the any information that is encoded in the URL, right? Now, for us personally, we could have been using a cookie, right, to be able to know, oh, well, it remembers that this is a screen for you, right? But that information is not available when you send it over to somebody, right? Or maybe when you bookmark it, right? It needs to be able to recreate it entirely from information encoded in the URL, right? And this is a very typical common technique called URL encoding, right? So let's see how we implement it. So first of all, notice that right, this screen is mapped to search, but search hello is not mapped to anything, so it doesn't show anything, right? So the way to fix that is that we're just going to add another route, right? That maps to both, whether you have a search term or you don't have a search term. They will, at the same time, both of them will render the search screen, right? So here we're just going to add two versions of the route, both of them rendering the same element. See that? The same element, search and search term. Whether you have a search term or you don't, they both render Napster search, okay? Now, but if we do have the encoding there, what we can do, right, is to parse, right? So let's grab this. Right, we can parse the parameter, right, the search term, right, and populate this input field, right? So let's do that. And we're going to parse the term, the search term. You're going to parse the search term. If the term is there, we're going to do the search immediately, right? As we log in, there it is. See that? Right. So if we have hello, or we have 1, 2, 3, right? It's going to do the search term right away, right? Or you have AC/DC, right? No, AC/DC. There it is, right? Or you have the Beatles, right? It does the search. Also, if you do the search here, it also does the search, right? But now we have a problem. Notice that this says Eagles and this says Beatles, right? And so they should be in sync, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to add an additional navigate here so that it will encode whatever search term we did, it'll encode it in the URL, right? It'll add the search term as we type them, it'll copy it into the route, right? So if we say Beatles, we search, there it is, or if we say Eagles, search, notice it updates the URL at the top. And now we have fixed the problem that we had originally. Notice that if we had navigated to the album, but then we came back, it was not remembering, but now it does. See that? It does a search again, right, with that Eagles in there, and it re-renders the screen just from where we left. Yes? Very, very important. And I think that's one of the requirements in one of the projects, right, that it should remember, right, that if I do a refresh, right, it should be able to recreate the content. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Yeah. So next thing, we're gonna have to deal with various users being logged in, right? That I'm logged in as Alice, you're logged in as Bob, right? And each one of us is interacting with this information, right? Some of them are liking things, other ones are leaving reviews on a particular album. And for that, we're gonna have to merge, we're gonna have to integrate, right, the person who's logged in along with the information that we're extracting or retrieving from Napster, right?